One way to amplify the more meaningful moments in your manga, comic, or light novel is actually to write better death scenes. In today's video, I'll be giving you 14 key tricks to writing powerful death scenes in your manga, comic, or light novel. My first tip is make readers care about the character. Now, you can make your readers care about your character in multiple ways. If your character is a protagonist or a hero character, maybe there's someone who is really kind and likable, and this is a good way to make your audience really like this character. If your character is a villain character, maybe they're really smart or strategic in the plans they make, or they have a more kinder side to them that isn't typically shown unless it's shown to the audience. You could also give your character, who might have a death scene in your book, a stronger goal that they really must fulfill in the story, and if your character unfortunately passes away before they're able to fulfill this goal, it makes your story a lot more powerful. Another great way to create a character that your audience will care about is to give them really relatable qualities. So think about how you could put yourself into the shoes of your character and think about what you would do if you were this character, and that's a really good way to make your characters far more relatable in your story. With this, it's also important in my second tip to show the good qualities of the character that you're giving a death scene to. So when you're building up to a death scene in your manga, comic, or light novel, and you really want this to be a powerful moment, it's important to show the good qualities of this character, especially leading up to this moment. So before this dire event happens, you need to ensure that your audience understands all of the good qualities about this character. So show them in their moments when they're kind, and show their thoughtfulness, and show their own perspective and feelings about different situations in your book. If you're having a death scene for one of the really good characters in your book, so someone who's already good, like a hero character, you might show how they help the people around them, or show how they're kind to other people. And if this is a villain, maybe your villain has finally gone through a redemption arc, or maybe you show or reveal some kind qualities about the villain that you didn't show before. And then when you reveal these good qualities about your characters and your audience really begins to care about your characters, this is when later on in the book you create a death scene which really makes your audience feel the emotions for these characters, because you have already spent time developing a connection between this character and the audience. My third tip is trick readers into believing everything is fine. This feels very cruel to do this to your audience, but it's also a good way to really increase the emotional impact of the scene you're writing. It can be helpful to deceive your readers right until the very end of this scene and make your readers believe that everything is going to work out fine. When we see a character we like who may potentially have a death scene in a manga, comic, or light novel, we usually go through a kind of denial because we don't want to lose this character that we really care about. And this really applies to the story you're creating as well. Make your audience believe that your character is going to manage to get through this and that everything will be okay. And then when you deceive them and you create this kind of twist, it really increases the impact of your scene and makes the death scenes you're writing more powerful and memorable. My fourth tip is consider the effect a character death has in the story. When you're writing a death scene in your story, it's important to not only think about what the lead up towards that scene is like, but also the effect that it has after this event has occurred. So you really need to think about how the other characters are responding, or how different situations might be once this character is gone. For example, maybe the other characters around them are in denial, or they're very upset, or they're arguing with each other, however they reveal the emotions that they're feeling. Or maybe this character who has just died in the previous scene is someone who is the only one who understands the truth about a certain situation, or they're the only one that has the power to help with a certain event. And so without this character, things are going to be a lot more difficult, or maybe impossible for these characters to achieve. The character's death might cause conflicts between characters, or it might bring certain characters together who didn't really get along before. It may even cause new information to come to the surface, which may end up confusing things even more. So basically, when there's a character death, you really need to add an impact with that as well. You need to think about what has been lost in the story with this character and how these events would affect the other characters and the situations surrounding them. My fifth tip is consider what has been lost apart from the character themselves. So this is a continuation of the previous tip, but when you're creating your character death and you're showing the impact afterwards, it's important to think about what has been lost. And as I mentioned before, your character may have abilities or powers that were going to help the other characters in a certain situation, and so without this character being there, it might be impossible for your characters to get through or do this thing in the way they had intended before. This character may have also had important information that they now can't pass on. Your character may also have had the key to a certain place or a location, and because they're the only one that knows it, the other characters now lose access to this location because they no longer have the key to get there. So really consider with your story what has been lost apart from the character themselves, and really show how this affects the world in your story and how this really changes the current events. My sixth tip is create a realistic death scene. Keep in mind that death scenes don't have to be excessive or flashy, and you can actually more subtly reveal these moments, especially if this moment is more meant to be emotional rather than simply impactful. It's also important to consider whether or not you intend to bring back this character later on. If you create a death scene that shows a lot of finality, then your audience would likely believe that this character is not going to come back later on. But if you don't really show the character death scene, then there may be a chance that later on in the story you'll bring them back. So really consider how you actually show the death scene in your book, and try and avoid scenes that are flashy or excessive if the scene is meant to be more emotional or dire. My seventh tip is relate a death scene to a previously sad scene. Relating the death scene to other previously sad moments in your book can really amplify the emotions overall and make your audience feel more connected to the scene. In relating it to a sad scene that happened previously, it can really remind the readers of this character and their character arc. For example, your character might be holding a flower that was really symbolic in a previous scene. Or your character, as they're going through this death scene, might mention a moment or an experience they went through in the past and show their own perspective on it. Maybe they tell the characters around them the truth about how they felt at a previous moment. Or in order to refer to a different moment, maybe they act the same way as another character did in another sad moment. Or maybe if you're showing this with a villain, maybe you reflected with their previous behavior. So maybe before they were actually really villainous and bad, but in this moment you kind of show their opposite personality, their underlying personality, and how they truly feel in this moment. So really look back over the scenes in your story featuring this character and think about how you could connect the two scenes in a subtle way to subconsciously show your readers this character's journey and what has led them to this point, and their feelings and emotions that they might be experienced during these times. My eighth tip is use death scenes to advance the story. When you're creating important death scenes in your story, it's important to always use the death scene to advance the story in some way. It can become problematic if you create a character death scene, but then nothing really changes afterwards. If you create a character death scene, but the characters still have all the access to the knowledge they need, or they understand what they must do, or they have the special items they need, then this death scene that you have created may not advance the story as well as it really could. By advancing the story, it doesn't necessarily mean that things have to be easy for your characters, and in fact, when you're writing scenes in your book, I think it's better to make things difficult for your characters, because this is when you really show your characters' growth. You really show what your characters are doing in your story, how they experience emotions, and how they get through difficult times. So when you create a character death scene, it's important to ensure that something has changed. Maybe it's just the character's feelings. Maybe they feel more defeated now than ever. Or maybe your characters lose some information that was really important. Maybe they feel like they've lost the person they care about the most, and with all this grief, it's really hard for them to understand what they must do next and to continue to feel confident in their actions. So when you're writing death scenes in your story, don't simply kill a character to make a scene look more dire or dramatic. You can do this, but make sure that after this event has happened, there is always a result of this. Remember that there is always a cause and an effect, and after a certain situation has occurred, there should always be something that has happened as an effect of these moments. My ninth tip is avoid predictable deaths. When you're writing the death scenes in your story, try and avoid predictable deaths where you can. So what I mean by this is don't show a certain situation leading up to this moment too much. So don't reveal to your audience too early on what might happen by hinting at it too often. It's important for a death scene in a story to be something more unexpected because your character may not know when this is going to happen, and the unexpectedness of it happening makes it more emotional in your story overall. My 10th tip is make your readers miss this deceased character. You could do this by creating scenes that would mean the most to your deceased character. For example, maybe your character has a really important goal, but before they are able to fulfill that goal, they unfortunately pass away in the story. So later on, when you're creating a scene where the other characters have managed to fulfill this goal, the scene feels a lot more meaningful because the character who truly started that goal in the first place isn't there to witness it with the characters. In another scene, maybe there's a special object or a gadget that needs to be fixed, but the character is the only one who knew how to do it, and so your other characters will feel more emotional knowing that they don't have the same skills as this character did. Unfortunately, in most cases, we don't fully realize what we have until it's gone, and this is the same case when creating characters in these certain moments in your book. It's important to really emphasize in these moments what it means for this character to not be there in your story, and to show these moments to your audience so that they will feel the emotions along with your characters. My 11th tip is show how the characters have grown together. When you're creating a character death scene in your book, it's important in the lead up to these moments to show how characters in the book have grown and developed together over the story. Show the characters' bond and how they have become friends or maybe even more throughout the story. This doesn't necessarily have to mean that you have to show these characters from childhood to the current moments. Even if they do meet as adults, they still might go through a lot of difficult moments together, and in this instance, this is their character growth. This means that they have experienced various moments together and experienced hardships or happy moments, and they have managed to get each other through these times. By showing your characters' growth together over the story and how they have managed to be there for each other, you ensure that the history remains throughout the story. My 12th tip is show what happens after the character death. When you're creating a death scene in your story, especially if this scene is something more meaningful and it's supposed to be really important to the story, it's also important to show a kind of finality to it. So instead of skipping time or just avoiding the situation, your characters may end up doing something after the character death to really appreciate this character and show their life and show their gratitude for the life they lived. In this instance, I'm really talking about things like maybe this character's funeral or certain rituals that may occur after this character's passing. And this can really help you to show the finality of this character's death in the story to really emphasize to your readers and your characters that this character will not be coming back later on in the story. Keep in mind that you don't always have to do this, and some scenes don't call for it. However, if you really want to make sure that there is a finality to this scene, then it might help by adding these kinds of moments to your book. The 13th tip is make things change due to the death scene. A character death, no matter how major or minor the character is still a very impactful moment in the book, and it's important to give it enough emphasis in your story. Therefore, after these moments, things should change in your story, and by this I mean more in the long term changes that occur after these events. After the character's death, the world should change in various ways. People might change, their personalities might change, their goals might be different, or their entire quest might be different. And finally, my 14th tip is that in the character death scene, if your character has truly passed away, don't bring them back. As a final tip for this video, which is more like a bonus tip, I just want to mention that if you're creating a death scene in your book and you don't plan on having this character come back later on, make sure that there is a finality to this scene if you don't intend to bring this character back. If you do intend to bring this character back later on in the story, make the death scene something more subtle, and so it can be easier to then change it into a plot twist and bring this character back. So basically, if the character is not coming back, add a kind of finality in your story, but if they are, maybe make it more subtle so that you have enough opportunity to bring the character back later on. Thank you so much for watching my video today, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in the comment section down below. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!